Before we can understand the epistemological theories and how they actually relate to lesson planning, it's important to kind of go into a little bit of background and then a little bit of understanding about what some of these terms actually mean. So before we get into what the terms mean, let's talk about how this idea of epistemological theory and lesson planning really relate to your time here at Wagner's Education Department. So the mission of Wagner's Ed Department is to prepare teachers with a strong commitment to three things. A pedagogical practice that is, 1, inclusive, 2, democratic, and finally, constructivist. And it's really this third piece right here that I want to talk about today, is this constructivist mentality or theory. Constructivist actually comes from one of our epistemological theories that we're going to talk about today, called constructivism. But before we get to that, one last piece of background. So what is an epistemology? Well, an epistemology is a way of knowing. How do we, as human beings, learn? As I already said, there's three main epistemological theories that relate to what we do here in education, and the first one is constructivism. Remember, anytime you see this ism at the end, the suffix ism, we're talking about a belief or a theory. So constructivism holds that we learn, remember we're talking about ways of knowing, ways of learning. Human beings learn by actively constructing meanings about the world around them. So they are active constructors of meaning. There are two key aspects to this. One is that it happens throughout our lives. Our lives. And two, that is both individual and social. So let me give you an example. When I taught 8th grade social studies, we talked about the concept of racism. And obviously this term's going to come up when we talk about the Civil War. And one of the really important, insightful questions that my 8th graders asked was Abe Lincoln a racist? See, we learned that in a lot of his early debates, he didn't outright say that African Americans should be free. And he certainly didn't go as far as to say that African Americans were equal to whites. So this idea of what is a racist and how does that inform our understanding of history was something that we constructed both as a class, so socially, and that each individual constructed when we started thinking about what does racist mean for us today versus what it means in a historical sense. So this obviously is going to be one of the key epistemological theories that we're going to be focusing on in this class and really throughout our program. But there are two other epistemological theories that I want to touch upon because they really affect the way that we think about lesson planning. The next one that I really want to touch on is behaviorism. You're probably familiar with this concept when we talk about Pavlov, because behaviorism is learning a series of responses to stimuli. So this has either negative or positive stimuli really impact our learning. So in a classroom, if every time I put, if I make a quote and I'm writing along right here, then I end the quote and then I put the period on the outside. Every time I do that, the teacher knocks off points and says that I need to put that period on the inside of the quotes. I'm probably going to learn after a while that in the United States at least, punctuation goes on the inside of the quotation marks. So that would be a negative stimuli. Or I could have a positive stimuli. If I'm praised for doing something right, I'm probably going to continue that action. So how does behaviorism fit into our educational philosophies? Well, a lot of times these positive and negative responses to stimuli really allow us to measure behavior to see if students learn. So if a student 80% of the time puts the period on the inside of the quotation marks, I may fairly confidently say that he or she, when they really think about it, have learned this behavior. There's a positive thing about this and a negative thing. On a positive idea, it's easy to measure, right? I can easily count up how many times Joey puts the period on the inside of quotation marks, and if it's 80% or below, I know that we still have work to do. If it's 80% or above, I can feel fairly confident and move on in that lesson. The negative, though, is what does this thing called learning mean? One of my favorite examples actually comes with one of the science professors here at Wagner, Horst Onken. Horst Onken does a lot of work in biology and in earth sciences, and he has a phenomenal, I'm sure, understanding of photosynthesis. I can explain photosynthesis to you, but it's going to be on a much lower scale than what Horst Onken could do. So what does learning mean? The last one that I want to touch upon is actually developmentalism. Developmentalism is actually the last epistemological theory that I want to take a look at, because this really affects the structure of our learning and schooling. And that's that learning comes in stages. And through time. So let me give you an example. That in late elementary school, most teachers and curriculum specialists believe students can use abstract numbers. If you think about it, from grades 1 to 3, most students or most teachers use manipulatives to help students really understand the types of numbers that they're using. If I take 2 away from 3, I have 1 apple left. But it isn't until late elementary school that we really start getting into the long division and the multiplication. And it's from this belief that you are not developmentally ready to handle those abstract numbers. So there's, again, always a positive and a negative, right? So the positive to this is that it's easy to categorize students. I can easily say, oh, you are in 4th grade, you should be able to handle these abstract numbers. One huge negative to this, though, is that it doesn't account for individual learning. Nor does it really account for iterative, so that learning that isn't linear, iterative learning. So there are some things that I may start to learn and then have to relearn, or I know the broader concepts of long division, but I don't understand certain pieces of it. So it's that iterative learning that I totally miss from developmentalism. So what does all of this actually have to do with lesson planning? And how do these concepts all relate? Well, we're still learning a lot about the brain. We don't know for 100% positive which of these three theories is the most appropriate. And in fact, it's probably best to say that all of these theories are appropriate to some degree in our thinking about education. Most current research says that constructivism is really the way that we learn how to put our world together, how to think about our world. But behaviorism certainly has its benefits because it's easy to measure, and quite frankly, to some extent, we do learn from our stimuli, and that is one way that we do learn. Maybe not school learning, but learn about our world. And certainly there are developmental aspects to our learning as well. So where these three epistemological theories, ways of knowing, come into our school system is really in three key aspects. One is on the outside, the structural piece of schooling, and that's by grades. This idea that certain pieces of knowledge are held within certain grades and grade levels is really a developmental approach. Okay? But we also see developmentalism, interestingly, in the content topics. So for example, so this is another developmentalism. So for example, I might not teach about the use of really gory medical, wartime medical equipment to elementary schoolers. I might do that though when we get up into high school. So we have to be really careful about some of the developmental pieces there. When it comes to behaviorism, we definitely see behaviorism in our objectives. When we begin writing our lesson plans, we're going to be creating objectives. And one of the keys to these objectives is that they need to be linked to a behavior so that we can easily measure student learning and see student progress. The final piece to how we understand our lesson plans is really going to be this constructivist idea, though, and this is going to be the cornerstone of what we talk about when we talk about methodology. We talk about how to teach students, because we are fairly confident in our own knowledge as scientists and as scholars that it's through constructivism that we really learn and build our base of knowledge and our skills. So constructivism is going to be seen in our tasks and assignments. How we create learning situations. These are the situations for our students. So all three of these epistemological theories are going to be used in this class, but for our methods course, we're going to be focused on constructivism and really developing these tasks and these assignments so that we can measure them through a behaviorist lens, and always keeping in mind that we need to keep our lessons developmentally appropriate for students.